All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the November Science Communication webinar. As usual, we're going to ask that you keep your cameras and your mics off today. If you have any questions, please go ahead and drop those in the chat and we'll get them answered at the end of Christina's presentation. So today we have Dr. Christina Watkins with us, the agency's lead social scientist, and she will be presenting on the North Carolina Outdoor Experience Survey. So go ahead and take it away, Christina.
Great. I hope everyone can hear me. Like Carrie said, I'm Christina Watkins. I'm the lead social scientist with the agency. And I'm going to be talking about a fairly big project that we conducted in 2022 and 2023. But before I get started on that, I do want to give just the slightest intro for those who don't know us. Here in the Office of Conservation Policy Analysis. This is the office in which I work as part of a team of several folks. We're a smaller office than others in the agency, but we do quite a bit of a variety of activities. Me and Catherine Jewell, we work on the social science aspect of our office, but we also have folks that work on evaluation and strategic planning, issues in diversity and inclusion, and what many of you might be more familiar with, the rulemaking. Typically, the work that we do in our office involves working with division partners who bring in sort of the biological data, and then we can help with the social data, whether it's collecting data from surveys or focus groups, getting evaluations from programs or courses, working with different constituents at our in North Carolina. We can help kind of merge and bridge the species biological data with the social data to sort of help make informed management decisions. And when it comes to social science, in case anyone is new to sort of concept of social science and what we do for the agency, what social science is the study of human society and behavior. It helps to identify reasons behind behaviors, predict actions and behaviors, understand motivations, satisfactions, attitudes, and a plethora of other social aspects, as well as explaining social groupings, cultural traditions, and measuring value of natural resources and determining economic impact of activities. And this project I'm excited to talk about today, which we call the 2022 North Carolina Outdoor Experience Survey, kind of bridges all of those different aspects. This was a fairly involved project that started right after I began this position in 2021 with sort of an effort to try and figure out who our constituents are. So as many of you know, we have our constituents have a variety of interests when it comes to wildlife associated recreation. We have our hunters, anglers, target shooters. We have wildlife viewers, trappers, people that view wildlife in their backyard. The range of activities that we offer in North Carolina and that our agency helps to facilitate and regulate is just so varied and complex. So part of this study, we were trying to figure out who are these folks that are doing these activities in North Carolina. What do they like to do, and how do they like to spend money in the state on these activities? Now, some of this might seem more intuitive to folks in our agency than other things. So I do want to just give a brief sort of rundown on maybe why we should care about economics for natural resource management. There's lots of reasons that are uses for economic information when it comes to natural resource management. You can look at things like your return on investment, things like, is the money that we spend on a certain activity or project worth the return, either in financial terms to the economy or public utility? Are people happy with it? In terms of planning for the future, also, asking the question, are we providing enough services to meet the demand? So, the study you're going to find out in a little bit, we found that there's a lot of folks that are into wildlife viewing in North Carolina. So the question kind of comes up, are we providing enough services to meet this demand of people who want to participate in these activities? And lastly, we can look at impact. So what kind of impact is a certain activity having on an economy, whether it's local economy, state economy, or nationwide? This is important because it helps, describe the importance of the activities that we regulate. It helps to defend money spent on certain activities or programs. It helps when requesting funds for projects. It's overall kind of useful for our agency to defend the work that you all do. And part of this project, we performed an economic impact analysis, which is a measure of the impact of a project, program, or policy on the economy of a specified region, whether it's local up to national. These sort of impact analyses are used in various industries. Like tourism boards tend to use them to look at impacts of tourism on like counties and local economies. But basically it measures wages, investments, and jobs, and how those things trickle out into the economy. So for example, your purchase of a fishing rod, how that goes into supporting jobs at the store that you bought the rod, at the places that sell the bait, and the influence of those activities in the state. So our objectives for the study are, as you see here on the screen. This is kind of getting back to the reason of the study, which is we're trying to figure out who these folks are, what they do, and how they spend money. So we wanted to estimate the number of wildlife-associated recreationists in North Carolina who participate in specifically hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing. We also wanted to look at their demographics, participation rates, and recreational profiles, as well as estimating expenditures and economic impact. So to do this, we had sort of an intense kind of discussion and process when it came to developing the methods for the survey. We sent it out using two forms of data collection. The first was a postcard push-to-web survey. So we sent out this postcard that you can see on the screen here, just inviting people to take the North Carolina Outdoor Recreation Survey. We left it kind of vague on purpose, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And we sent that to a random sample of households. With thanks from our amazing GIS team here at the agency, they were able to pull a random sample of households that we could then mail these postcards out to. And then in combination with that, we knew that sort of a postcard, sending that out to a random sample of households who don't know who we are as an agency wasn't going to get the highest response rate. And I think at the end of the day, it ended up being about 6% of our final sample was from the postcards. So we knew we were going to need to supplement that from the get-go. And we did that with a panel survey, which is a sort of third-party vendor that recruits survey participants. And those survey participants were stratified to match demographic quotas based on the U.S. Census. So they looked at the census data from North Carolina and made sure that we got proportional responses from each key demographic group to take the survey. So we made sure that we had a representative sample of the public. So we used both of these methods combined because when we're looking at a survey of hunters or anglers, we have our database from license sales data. But when it comes to wildlife viewers and other things, and if you're trying to estimate the actual number of folks who participate in activities, we needed to make sure that the survey was open to the public and not just our constituent base. In designing the survey, we asked several questions based on activity participation. So the very first question asked, which of these activities do you participate in? And depending on the activities that you selected, you got follow-up questions for hunting, freshwater fishing, and wildlife viewing. I'll also mention here that we did include target shooting and trapping in the survey as well, but we just got so few responses from folks that participated in those activities that it wouldn't yield generalizable results statewide. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to exclude those two groups. So for these three, hunters, freshwater anglers, and wildlife viewers, we asked, what species do you hunt, fish, or view? What types of land and water do you use? What's your trip profile, meaning how many days and trips and miles do you drive to do your activities? What are your expenditures? Whether people own or lease land for doing these activities? What barriers to participation do they perceive? What's their relationship with the NCWRC? And as well as their trust in the agency. We also aim to get, estimates of the number of folks that participated in these activities. So in order to do that, this is sort of the method behind that. So the very first question in the survey was, in the last 12 months, have you participated in any of these forms of wildlife-associated outdoor recreation in North Carolina? So based on that, we used that question to calculate proportions of participants. And then we checked those proportions against other sources of data. I will also mention that our survey invitation, like the postcard that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation, it omitted any information about exactly what the survey was going to be asking about. So for example, if we asked, if the invitation said, take a hunting survey, only hunters are going to even look at that survey, right? So we left it kind of vague, the outdoor experiences, for that reason, so that we would get people to click on the survey and say, even if they didn't participate in any of the activities, we have that data. That's what we used in the proportional calculations. And I will just say we did check against other sources of data, which I'll briefly mention. For hunters, we looked at our own database, as well as harvest statistics. For anglers, we did the same with the Alvin database. And then for wildlife viewers, it's a little bit trickier because, we don't sell a license for wildlife viewing. So we used estimates from the 2016 Fish and Wildlife survey, their North Carolina estimates, to kind of double check against our calculations. And then last two slides on methods, I'm going to talk briefly about economic impact modeling, what that is and how we used it to get the numbers that I'm going to be talking about later in the presentation. So in our survey, we asked, a good chunk of the survey asked questions about expenditures. And expenditures come in two categories, equipment expenditures and trip expenditures. So equipment expenditures are things that you typically buy once a year or once every few years. You're not buying a new fishing rod every single time you go fishing, right? You may buy one once a year. You may not want to buy one at all on a particular year because you bought one 2 years ago and you're still using it. So the question asks, in the last 12 months, how much money did you spend on any of these activities or any of these equipment purchases? Those things like, ammunition, binoculars, fishing rods, things like that. We also asked about per trip expenditures. So these are things that you do buy on a trip basis. So every single time you go fishing, you might buy bait. Every single time you go on a hunting trip, you drive there maybe, and you spend money on gas. And that might be different every time. But we asked for sort of on a typical trip, what's your average that you spend on things like hotels, restaurants, snacks, things like that. We took that data and combined it with our estimates of the number of participants for each activity, the average number of trips folks said that they take, and the number of people that they pay for. And we put that all into our input-output model, which we use the software called InPlan, which combines the survey data inputs I just mentioned with sort of broader economic data from the Bureau of Economics on number of jobs in the area, cost of living, industry-specific information, all the stuff, and that spits out sort of the economic impact. So as an example of what that kind of looks like, this is an example from our inland fishing portion of the study. So an example of a trip expenditure for inland fishing was bait. People spend, typically will buy bait every trip or maybe every other trip. And the average per person per trip average for bait was $29. We multiply that by the average number of trips, the total number of participants, and take into account the number of people that are paid for on each trip. If one person is buying bait for 4 folks in the family, you take that into account, and you end up with your total expenditure per item. So people in North Carolina are spending $115 million on bait per year, roughly. We can also do the example of our equipment expenditures. So this is an example of expenditures for rods and reels, which again is not something you buy on a per trip basis. It might be once a year, once every other year, things like that. And when that's averaged out across everyone who took the survey, the per person average was around $69. That's multiplied by the total number of participants, and you get your total expenditure per item per year. So that's around $40 million. So even though bait has a lower cost than fishing rods, it's the multitude of times that you're buying things that adds up and can be more expensive than some of your equipment. And then sometimes it's the opposite. Things like boats and RVs are considerably more expensive than things like bait. And when those things are added up, even though they're not on a per trip basis, they can end up being quite significant as well. And then again, I just want to reiterate that this is extrapolated over, the entire North Carolina population. So all these like individual small purchases that you make when you're going on a fishing trip or hunting trip, they really add up and they really have a significant impact, as you'll see in just a moment. So I'm going to now get into results for the study, and I'm going to break that up into results on things like descriptive results on who participates in these activities. So that's participation estimates, recreational profiles, and barriers to participation. And then I'll talk about the economics at the end. So when it comes to our overall results for the study, we had 5,925 individuals respond to the survey. Of those, 69% said that they participate in fishing, 51% participated in wildlife viewing, and 24% participated in hunting. Now, using those proportions and fact-checking it against items, the data that we already have in-house, taking into account license data, past studies, and response rates. Again, some people got to that very first screener question and selected none of the above, right? Combining all that together, we had about, 4,000 anglers, 3,000 wildlife viewers, and about 1,400 hunters respond to the survey. And we took all that into account, and we came up with about 1.2 million North Carolina residents that participate in freshwater fishing. 2.9 million North Carolina residents participate in wildlife viewing, and around 300,000 residents participate in hunting. So first I'll talk about results when it comes to hunters. There's the 1,400 folks that said they participate in hunting. When asked what species do they hunt, the top species that were selected were white-tailed deer, small game, wild turkey, migratory birds and waterfowl, and black bear. The exact percentages for these can be found in the full report for this project, which I'll share more about, where you can find that at the end of this presentation. When it came to small game, the top species of small game hunted according to our project were squirrels, rabbits, quails, raccoons, and foxes. And then when it came to the top birds and waterfowl species that were hunted were ducks, doves, Canada geese, woodcocks, and snipe. And looking at the average days hunted, trips taken, and miles traveled, we were able to get a sufficient response rate from deer hunters, small game hunters, and wild turkey hunters. We got a sufficient response rate that's able to create generalizable results from these groups. And for other groups that I mentioned in the previous slide, we just didn't get enough to be able to say, to generalize statements saying that all black bear hunters do X, Y, and Z. So for these three groups, you can see here that white-tailed deer and small game hunters spend a little bit more time and a little bit more days hunting per year than wild turkey hunters. But they're all taking around 5 to 7 trips per year to go hunting for their preferred for each species. And they travel between 20 and 30 miles on average. When we asked about where these folks are hunting, you can see that the majority of people are hunting on private land, whether it's land that they own or land that belongs to friends or family. That goes across all species, had higher proportions of people that selected private land over public land. And then leasing was the lowest amount of folks that said that. When it comes to land ownership, people that own or lease land for hunting, according to our survey, it was about 50% of people said that they own or lease land. Now, it's either them owning or leasing it or being part of a group that own or lease land, maybe belonging to a hunting club, things like that. About half of our respondents said that they do that. And of those folks that do own land, we asked what they do to sort of maintain habitat for wildlife, and the largest proportion said that they maintain fields and other plantings for wildlife, but not that many perform prescribed burns. And asked about barriers to hunting. We asked about barriers because the survey went out in, I believe, early 2022, which was still in that sort of post-COVID timeframe where we were noticing, getting feedback from people that there were a lot of barriers to hunting that were kind of specific to this post-COVID world, where there is increased prices, scarcity of equipment and materials, and all these things. So we wanted to figure out what barriers are acting on people in this special time in our history. So when it came to hunting, inflation seemed to be the biggest barrier. So the supplies that they regularly purchased were more expensive. Gas prices were also too high, and the equipment that they regularly used was not available. So maybe there wasn't as much ammo as in the past, or as many, other things that hunters might use. Another fairly decent barrier was people's financial and work situations changing. There's a lot of movement that happened during the pandemic where people changed careers and moved around and things. So that kind of had a barrier as well. So getting into our freshwater anglers, we had about 3,000 folks respond saying that they are freshwater anglers. We've initially asked if they participate in fishing, and then had a follow-up of whether they participated in freshwater, saltwater, or a combination of fresh and saltwater fishing. Putting all that together, about 86% of our respondents to the survey said that they participate in freshwater fishing, either only freshwater or freshwater and saltwater fishing. When we asked what species they are, targeting, the number one was catfish, followed by crappie, black bass, and mountain trout. In terms of days fished and trips taken, miles traveled, they are participating in the number of days, kind of similar to our hunters. They're taking around 8.5 trips per year and travel just around 30 miles to get to their preferred fishing destination. We also asked where what types of water they like to fish. The biggest are the two columns on the left there that are from the shore. So most of the respondents to the survey said that they fish from the shore rather than fishing from a boat, whether that's fishing at a pond, lake, or reservoir, which was our highest proportional of respondents, or rivers and streams. And then slightly less participants participated in fishing from a boat, whether that's ponds, lakes, or rivers and streams. When we get to our freshwater anglers' barriers to fishing, they're kind of similar in terms to our hunting participants, but gas prices were ranked a little bit higher than it was for hunters. So gas prices are a bigger issue for freshwater anglers. And what's interesting is that the availability of equipment was not as much of a barrier as it was for hunters. So the fishing equipment was there and available, but not as much for hunters. When we get into wildlife viewers, we had about 1,800 respondents. These are the folks that actually answered the questions on wildlife viewing. Wildlife viewers were the last section of the survey. So if someone was an avid, hunter, fisher, and a wildlife viewer, they had a long time in the survey, and there was a bit of dropout. But from our responses, about 72% of wildlife viewers said that they take trips outside of their home to view wildlife, and about 28% only view wildlife around their home. So the people that are going on trips, they are both observing wildlife and photographing it. When it comes to the top species for viewing, number one was birds, followed by small land mammals, large land mammals, reptiles and amphibians, and then pollinators. And this is for folks that said that they took trips to go view wildlife. Their top bird species or types that they enjoyed viewing were songbirds, followed by birds of prey, waterfowl, shorebirds, and then the broader category of other birds. When it comes to where they like to go and view wildlife and what they do when they go out there, they're spending 18 days a year roughly viewing wildlife, and they take about 8 trips per year. Where they're going, they're mostly going to local or state parks, followed by national parks or national forests, and then only 8% of respondents say that they like to view wildlife on our state game lands. When focusing on folks that just view wildlife around the home, this was 22% of the respondents who view wildlife. And we asked what they like to do. They said they observe wildlife, and over half maintain a bird feeder. Many also photograph wildlife and like to maintain the area around their home to benefit wildlife. Whether that's gardening, having a pollinator garden, things like that. When looking at the top species for viewing for these around the home viewers specifically, it's pretty similar to our trip taken wildlife viewers, other than pollinators being much higher up on the list of top species for viewing, which makes sense, right? Looking at butterflies and bees and things around the home, it's a little bit easier to see at home than taking a special trip for that. When it came to barriers to wildlife viewing, gas prices were again the number one for wildlife viewers, followed by inflation and financial and work situations changing. Interestingly enough, again, the equipment purchase, the equipment not being available for purchase was the lowest ranked here as a barrier. Just there's not as much equipment needed for wildlife viewing as for the other activities. This is a little analysis I ran because I thought it was interesting as I was viewing and analyzing the data. This is participants who took the survey when they said that they hunt, view wildlife, or fish, and then seeing what other activities those individuals participated in. So if you look at the hunting group, and there's a lot of colors on this, I'll try to simplify it as much as I can. When you look at the hunting group, only 11% of hunters said that they only participate in hunting. So that's, 89% of hunters said that they hunt and participate in other activities. And that is drastically different than our wildlife viewer and angler survey population. Wildlife viewers and anglers, about 40% for each of those groups are only participating in that one activity. So 40% of wildlife viewers and 40% of anglers, when given all of these options of other activities to participate in, they selected nothing, right? So they're only doing that one activity. And then if you look at that orange triangle for wildlife viewers and anglers, that is, so for anglers, that's people that view wildlife and fish, and for wildlife viewers, that's people that view wildlife and fish. So the interesting thing here is that there's a lot of potential for R3 efforts and targeting some of these groups to get them into more activities. All right, now we can get into the economic impact results for each of these. So I'll preface this by saying what you're about to see are some pretty big numbers. But again, we're looking at statewide impacts. So it's pretty exciting. So if you get to hunting, based on our studies, the average expenditures per hunting trip is about $139. So that's how much people are spending every time that they go out hunting. Those expenditures, when broken up between trips and equipment and everything, is around $800 million. So people are spending quite a bit of money on all sorts of equipment and activities and things related to hunting in North Carolina. And then when you extrapolate that out in the model to get economic impact, that's around $1 billion. So it's pretty significant. Our study found that around 300,000 hunters spent around 3.7 million days hunting in North Carolina. And the study found that it supports around 6,000 jobs. This last fact on here, that for every dollar spent by hunters in North Carolina, there's a $1.70 return to the state economy. That is from a number called the social accounting multiplier, which basically just takes into account the ratio between expenditures and total impact to get that fact there. So moving on specifically into deer hunting, on average, people are spending around $149 per trip. These expenditures in total are around $600 million, and the total economic impact is around $732 million. People are spending 3 million days hunting deer in North Carolina, and it supports almost 5,000 jobs. And similar to hunting in total, there's a $1.71 return to the state economy for every dollar spent by hunters. When it comes to small game hunting, there was less small game hunters, so we had about 106,000 hunters, but 1 million days hunting. Their average expenditures per trip were $118 per trip. Their total expenditures were 167 million, and the total economic impact of their spending in the state was $200 million. For turkey hunting, that we assumed, or I think we projected that there's around 67,000 hunters. They spent 700,000 days hunting turkey in North Carolina. Their average expenditures per trip were about $129. All these expenditures amounted to $97 million across the state, and their total economic impact was $123 million. Next, I'm going to go into inland fishing, which is another scary high number that you'll see there. So based on the equipment and trip expenditures, we got that the average expenditures per trip for inland fishing was $133. And those expenditures totaled around $3.9 billion, which had a almost $6 billion impact on the state. This number largely comes from the fact that there's 1.2 million North Carolinians who spent 16 million days freshwater fishing in the state. So there's a lot of folks fishing, and they're going out, frequently. They're taking many trips. Their purchases support around 30,000 jobs. And for every dollar spent, there's $1.62 return to the economy. Well, lastly, we have another large number here with wildlife viewing. Again, mostly attributed to the large number of individuals that participate in those activities. We estimated that average expenditures per trip is around $100. Not everyone takes trips when they view wildlife. We had several folks who just see wildlife around the home, so that goes into that. And then there's people that take trips across the state to go view wildlife, and that is all factored into that. So when it comes to expenditures, there's about $5 billion in expenditures when it comes to wildlife viewing, and that a lot of that is just sort of outdoor tourism, things like that. And then that income has, or that those expenditures have an economic impact of around 7.5 billion. So lots of big numbers. So in conclusion, I'll go this last one first, that hunters, anglers, and wildlife viewers have a really big economic impact in North Carolina. A lot of folks are out there doing these activities in large numbers, and they're spending money when they're doing it. If anyone has any questions about the economics, I encourage you to make a list of all the things that you spend money on when you're out fishing and things like that, and it really adds up. And when you extrapolate that around over 10 million people, you can get some pretty big numbers. So there is a fairly large impact of all these activities in North Carolina. So the North Carolina public engages in all these activities in great numbers. There are post-pandemic economic conditions that are still causing barriers to participation, and there's some big R3 potential to engage anglers and wildlife viewers to participate in more activities. Cliff notes there, conclusions, but that is the whole presentation. I don't know if Carrie's already added it, but we had a social research assistant, Catherine LaRose, this year to help make fact sheets with some of the results for this study. And those should be in the chat or might be in the chat soon, as well as some economic fact sheets that we made earlier this year on the economic, all those fun graphics I showed a little bit ago. Thanks to our wonderful ENDE team over there. So that's where you can find that. The fact sheets, we also have some reports. We have a separate economic report and descriptive report available. I think they'll be available for everyone to access on the intranet team starting December 1st, I believe, but they're on the intranet right now as well, if you want to go and check those out. And I guess I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
All right, thanks, Christina. That was a great presentation. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat and I'll read them out loud so Christina can answer them. We have one here. So why do you think such a small percentage of people use WRC game lands for wildlife viewing as well as hunting? What might we do to increase that percentage?
Yeah, that's a great question. When it comes to wildlife viewing, it may just be because I think there's a couple of things. One is that people may not know who we are as an agency from a wildlife viewing perspective. They might not know who we are as an agency, or they might think that we are the agency that caters to hunters and anglers, and maybe don't identify game lands as a place that anyone is sort of allowed to go to. And they typically also don't have, the facilities that state parks and national parks and things have. So that could be another deterrent for wildlife viewers. When it comes to hunting, not totally sure. That could just be, people who have access to private land because there's so much of it in the state. They may just prefer the less being less crowded, having more ability to control the landscape for yourself. Those sort of things. If anyone else has any ideas on how to increase use of game lands, feel free to chime in.
All right, so I'll go ahead and ask a question. So, there were some pretty big numbers on those economics results produced. And when I first saw them, I did not believe the big numbers. So can you maybe explain a little bit more about what goes into determining the economic impact versus just expenditures? Because it kind of took me a while to understand that. So I'm willing to bet that some other folks are kind of like, whoa, those numbers are not real.
Yeah, and that just reminded me, I think when I first showed these results to you, Carrie, I had to do that exercise of I gave Carrie the list of items that we used in our survey. For fishing, it was, bait, rods, and reels, boats. For a specific trip, I guess it was like bait, restaurants, snack, gas, all these things, and had her list how much she typically spends on a trip, and it added up to way more than her initial estimate of what she assumed that she spent on a typical trip. So that kind of goes into it. The more specific questions you ask, the greater expenditures you're going to get at the very end of the day. So that goes into it. And then as far as the economic modeling aspect of this, the software that we use because it's the industry standard for this kind of thing, and it uses information from like the Bureau of Economics on like economic activity in certain regions, industry specific sectors, like how much the fishing industry itself or the recreational supply industry, economic factors in there. And when you purchase like a fishing rod, that goes to a store at first, and that store employs people in a region. Those people, have spouses who work in hospitals and children that go to school, and all of that creates an economic impact that trickles out from every single purchase. So that's how it kind of, expands.
All right, we have another question. Was there a definition given in the survey for wildlife viewing? If so, what was it?
Yeah, let me go. The fact sheet actually had it in there because we spent a lot of time going back and forth on what that definition was. So we tried to focus it a little bit more instead of just being like, hey, do you ever look out your window and see a bird? So it was intentionally observing, photographing, or feeding wildlife around the home or visiting parks and natural areas for the primary purpose of viewing wildlife. And that is the same statement that is used in the Fish and Wildlife national survey that they do every 6 years or so to determine who is a wildlife viewer. It's also used by some other academic folks like at Virginia Tech and other places to define what that is.
All right. I didn't see the option of hunting and wildlife viewing. Did I miss it, or was there not that option given in the survey?
Yeah, so the very first question in the survey was, which activities do you participate in? And it was a check all that apply question. So that's where you could say that you hunt and you view wildlife and you fish and you target shoot and trap. Those are the different options. So that's where we were able to see what activities people are participating in other than, in the pie chart. Was hunting and wildlife. Oh, I can double check the report because I edited this because it had target shooting on it, and so I edited the legend as well, and I may have gotten rid of it. Or sorry, it could be that I accidentally got rid of it, or it could be that the last option was other activity combination, so maybe it just didn't amount to that many folks to make the pie chart easy to see. But I can get back with you and look in the report itself to see what that was.
All right, I have another question. So you mentioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report. So I know a lot of staff use that report, and a lot of folks reference that. How can staff use the results of this study? Can that be used similar to how they use the 2011 or 2016 reports?
Yeah, so the whole one of the reasons for conducting the study in the first place was to get better North Carolina specific estimates and the national report. This study was the questions asked were really modeled off of the national survey in order to get results that were, transferable and applicable and presenting the same numbers that people are used to seeing in that report. Because of the way that the national study changed the way that it was doing sampling in this 2022 or 23 go around, it was determined that we could probably produce better North Carolina specific results by doing an in-house study. So everything you could get from that study, you should be able to get from this one, because we were able to focus specifically on the state.
All right, any more questions for Christina? Right. So this information is a great snapshot to inform policy. Is there a plan to conduct the survey to update the results on a recurring basis on the timeline of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife report, or every 5 years or something like that?
That is a great question and thought for the future. I began this position in 2021, and this was a pretty intense project. It took almost a year to complete. It would be great if we could do it every 5 or so years. And that is something I think we could definitely be considering and hope to be able to, keep up and replicate.
All right, and back to the question from before, is it not in the pie chart of the hunters, 14% wildlife watchers is the interpretation? Is that correct?
The 14% on the hunter chart is hunting, fishing, and viewing wildlife, right?
So it includes fishing.
Yeah, I'll have to check back on this. I'm sorry, everyone. I think I may have deleted it from the chart.
All right, so in terms of a recurring study, would it be as labor intensive to repeat it as it was the first time?
Well, at least from the survey design point of view, it wouldn't be as labor intensive because we have the survey now. We could just send out again. And we definitely have learned from experience and would be able to change a couple of things from the data collection perspective to potentially get a higher response rate from folks using our own methods before having to go to the panel study. I think it's still labor intensive when it comes to the analysis because there's a lot of factors and also it's a fairly long survey. I would hope that we could do it. I don't want to speak for, the folks that ultimately make that decision, but I would be up for doing it every few years.
All right, last call for questions. All right, well, thank you, Christina, again for the presentation today. And as a reminder, the recording of today's presentation will be made available on our YouTube channel, and we will send out an email to everyone when that's ready to be viewed. So please make sure to join us next month when Fred Scharf and Jake Matthews from UNCW will be presenting on population structure and connectivity of Atlantic sturgeon. And we look forward to seeing you then. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.